Welcome to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring the random prompts of Daniel Rosehill as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters. Join us for deep dives into AI, technology, and whatever other random thing Daniel finds fascinating today. Subscribe on Spotify or your favorite podcatcher. Now, today's episode.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
Hi there, Herman and Corn. So one of the great, small challenges in my life lately was trying to get a speaker in our bedroom. This is before the leak and mold started appearing on the wall, which quickly shifted priorities. But before that, I was thinking, how can I get a speaker there? It's a very, very small space. We have a projector at the back of the bed. There's no TV. And sometimes my wife and I would watch stuff on Netflix or whatever using the projector. Now, sometimes what you want at the end of the day is just to watch something good on the television, and you want a nice experience. Now, how to do this in a small bedroom that there is literally about enough room to pass to the toilet at the bottom of the bed. So compound this with the fact that this is a rental property, and I had a very hard time thinking how on earth we could get a decent speaker system. That's little Lazar doing his morning routine. So I tried to find some way to put up a speaker that wouldn't involve doing anything to the property like drilling, and I conceded to defeat until I thought, what if I put it in a corner of the room? It's not ideal. Imagine that there's a bed, and this speaker would be offset about 45 degrees and facing towards the bed. And I thought, well, if we can find a speaker that can kind of fill up the room, it could actually sound okay. To my mind, this would have sounded better than from behind the bed. Thereupon, I discovered something called Spatial sound. And I picked up a Soundcore Motion Plus, which is about $100 speaker, and it seems to do a pretty decent job. It's not the best speaker that I've heard, but it's pretty good. So what I'd love to ask you, Herman and Corn, is for folks who are trying to rig up comfortable viewing experiences in tiny little rental rooms like this, and you have to get a bit, it's very. If you own the property and it's a bit more spacious, you can do whatever you want. You can put in sound bars and speakers. But if you just want to get a little bit of creature comfort, luxury in a space like this, Spatial sound seems like a good enough place to start. That it's going to take one speaker in situations where you can't have more than one speaker, let alone a speaker in the best position, and kind of fill up the room with sound, and then it does so in a way that doesn't feel like it's very artificial. There's a whole world on top of this I discovered. The audiophile community is pretty amazing. People are really into have solutions for everything. I've even read about a technology where you can like map out the room, feed that to the speaker, and then you can have like spatial sound EQ that the speaker actually knows physically what type of room it's trying to fill up and where it is. So I'd love to learn all about that technology, Herman and Corn. I'm sure my Soundcore speaker is at the kind of lower end of that kind of products. But how does it work exactly? And if you did really want to take this seriously and do proper spatial sound, what kind of a process would you be looking at, and how does this room size EQing process work? Over to you, Herman and Corn. Let's talk about spatial sound.
So, I was walking past Daniel's room the other day, and I saw him standing in the corner with his phone held out like he was trying to catch a ghost. I almost asked if he'd finally found that legendary Jerusalem mold we keep hearing about, but then I realized he was just trying to calibrate a new speaker.
Herman Poppleberry here, and honestly, Corn, I think I'd prefer the Ghost. At least ghosts don't require a software update every 3 weeks. But Daniel's actually onto something really interesting here. He sent us this prompt about spatial sound and room mapping, specifically for his tiny rental bedroom. It's a classic problem. How do you get a cinematic experience when you can't even drill a hole for a coat hook, let alone a 5.1 channel surround system?
It's the ultimate city dweller's dilemma. You want the big sound, but you have the small space and a landlord who treats the walls like they're made of ancient parchment. And Daniel mentioned that Soundcore Motion Plus he picked up. It's a solid little speaker, but it's really just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to what spatial audio is actually doing under the hood in 2026.
Exactly. We've come a long way from just having a left and a right speaker. Today, we're talking about object-based audio and computational acoustics. It's not just about where the speaker is, it's about how the speaker understands the room it's in.
Let's start there, Herman. Because spatial audio has become such a buzzword, every pair of $10 earbuds claims to have it now. But for someone like Daniel, sitting in a room that's basically a rectangle with a bed and a projector, what is actually happening when a device says it's mapping the room?
That's the core of it. Traditional surround sound was channel-based. You had a center channel for dialogue, left and right for music, and rear channels for those whoosh moments. But spatial audio, like Dolby Atmos or other object-based formats, is object-based. The sound engineers don't say, put the sound of the helicopter in the left rear speaker. They say, put the helicopter at these three-dimensional coordinates.
Right, so the object is the helicopter, and its position is a piece of data attached to the sound file.
Precisely. Now, the magic happens when your speaker or your sound system takes those coordinates and looks at your room. To do that, it needs to know where the walls are, where the ceiling is, and where you are sitting. This is where the room mapping comes in. Most modern high-end systems use a process called acoustic telemetry.
Telemetry. That sounds like something NASA uses to track a rover.
It's not far off. When you set up a system like a Sonos Era 300 or a high-end soundbar, it often asks you to perform a calibration. It emits a series of chirps or sweeps. These are specific frequencies that bounce off the surfaces in your room. The microphones in the speaker, or sometimes the microphones in your smartphone, listen to those reflections.
So it's basically sonar. The speaker is pinging the room to see how long it takes for the sound to come back.
Yes, but it's even more sophisticated than just timing. It's looking at the impulse response. Different materials absorb different frequencies. If the sound bounces off a heavy velvet curtain, certain high frequencies get swallowed up. If it hits a bare stone wall like we have in so many of these old Jerusalem houses, it's going to be incredibly reflective and bright. The system analyzes that return signal and builds a digital model of the room's acoustic thumbprint.
Okay, so once it has that thumbprint, what does it do with it? I assume this is where the equalization, or EQing, comes into play?
That's step 2. Once the system knows that, for example, your left wall is 5 feet away and highly reflective, but your right side is an open doorway, it realizes the sound is going to be totally unbalanced. Without correction, the left side would sound much louder and muddier because of the immediate reflections. So, the internal processor applies a real-time equalization curve. It might dip the mid-range frequencies on the left side and boost the clarity on the right to compensate for the sound escaping through the door.
It's essentially tricking your ears into thinking the room is perfectly symmetrical and acoustically treated, even if it's actually a chaotic mess of furniture and laundry.
Exactly. And for Daniel's specific situation, where he has a speaker offset at a 45-degree angle from the bed, this is crucial. A dumb speaker at 45 degrees will always sound like it's coming from the corner. But a spatial-aware speaker can use something called beamforming.
We talked a bit about beamforming back in episode 2 and 33, didn't we? About how it can steer sound?
We did. It's worth a quick refresher because it's the how behind the where. By using an array of multiple small drivers and precisely controlling the timing of when each one fires, we're talking about millisecond differences here. The speaker can create constructive and destructive interference. It can literally aim a beam of sound to bounce off the wall behind Daniel's head.
So, even though the speaker is in the corner, Daniel hears the surround sound coming from behind him because the speaker used the wall as a mirror.
Right, it's an acoustic mirror. But for that to work, the EQ has to be perfect. If the wall mirror is made of wood, it'll change the tone. The speaker has to pre-adjust the sound so that after it bounces off the wood, it arrives at Daniel's ears sounding natural. It's like a golfer accounting for the wind and the slope of the green before they even hit the ball.
That's a great analogy. But here's the thing that always trips me up. We only have 2 ears. How does our brain even know if a sound is coming from above or behind us, if all the sound is ultimately just entering 2 ear canals?
Oh, that is the best part. That's psychoacoustics. It's all about what we call head-related transfer functions, or HRTFs. Think about the shape of your ear. The outer part, the pinna. All those little ridges and folds aren't just for show. They are designed by evolution to filter sound depending on where it's coming from.
So a sound coming from above hits the ridges of my ear differently than a sound coming from below.
Exactly. Your brain has spent your entire life learning how those subtle frequency shifts correspond to height and depth. Spatial audio systems use digital signal processing to bake those filters into the sound. In 2026, some apps even let you take a photo of your ear to create a personalized HRTF profile. Even if you're just wearing headphones, the system can mimic the way your ear would naturally filter a sound coming from above, you. When your brain hears that specific filter, it says, "Aha, that helicopter is overhead."
It's wild that we can simulate a physical shape, the ear using just math and software. But let's get back to Daniel's rental bedroom. He's got the Soundcore Motion Plus, which is a great budget entry. But he's asking about a more professional setup that doesn't involve drilling. If he wanted to level up, what does that path look like in 2026?
If I were Daniel and I wanted a serious upgrade without losing my security deposit, I'd look at a high-end multi-point wireless system. The technology has matured so much that the wireless part isn't a compromise anymore. We now have standards like WISA, which allows for multi-channel high-fidelity wireless audio with minimal latency.
So instead of one speaker in the corner, he's looking at a distributed system?
Right. For a small bedroom, he could use high-end wireless multi-speaker systems from manufacturers like Sony or Samsung. These are designed to be place and play. They consist of multiple wireless speakers that can be positioned around the room. You can literally put them on stands or even use heavy-duty command strips, though I'd be careful with the weight and they don't need a central receiver.
And how do they handle the mapping if they're all over the room?
They do it collectively. This is the professional version of what he's doing now. Each speaker has its own microphones. During setup, they all talk to each other. Speaker A chirps, and speakers B, C, and D all listen. They triangulate their positions relative to each other and the walls. Then, the system uses phantom imaging to create sound sources where there are no speakers.
Phantom imaging. That sounds like the ghost in the corner again.
It's basically the acoustic version of a hologram. By playing the same sound from 2 different speakers with slightly different timing and volume, the system can make you hear a sound coming from the exact center of your television screen, even if there's no speaker there. In a small room like Daniel's, a system like that can make the walls feel like they've disappeared. It can make a 10 by 10 foot room sound like a cathedral.
That seems like a massive leap in immersion. But what about the EQing process for those high-end systems? Is it still just chirps, or is there something more?
It's becoming continuous. This is a big shift we've seen recently. Instead of a one-time setup where you wave your phone around, the newest speakers have always-on AI room correction. They use their internal microphones to constantly monitor the return of the music they are playing. If Daniel moves a chair, or if his wife comes in and sits on the bed, which changes the absorption of the room, the AI detects the change in the reflected sound and adjusts its EQ in real time.
That's incredible. It's like a self-driving car, but for sound waves. It's constantly adjusting to the environment. But let's talk about the practical side for a second. Daniel is in a rental. He can't drill. He's got a projector at the back of the bed. If he wants this pro sound, where does he actually put the hardware?
Placement is still king, even with all this math. If he's using a projector, he probably has a clear wall at the foot of the bed. Ideally, you want your front soundstage to be there. Since he can't drill, he should look into floor-to-ceiling tension poles. They're very popular in Japan and Europe for small apartments. You wedge them between the floor and the ceiling, and they have shelves or mounts for speakers. No holes in the wall, but you get the perfect height for your speakers.
That's a brilliant workaround. It gives you the height channels that are so important for Atmos without needing to mount things on the ceiling. Because that's the spatial part, right? The height dimension?
Exactly. In a professional Atmos setup, you'd have speakers in the ceiling. In a Rental Pro setup, you use upfiring drivers. These are speakers on top of your main units that are angled to bounce sound off the ceiling. This is where the room mapping is most critical. The system needs to know exactly how high that ceiling is to time the bounce so that the sound lands on your head at the right moment.
I imagine the ceiling material matters a lot there, too. If you have those acoustic tiles or a popcorn ceiling, does it ruin the effect?
It doesn't ruin it, but it diffuses it. A flat, hard ceiling is actually better for upfiring speakers because it acts like a clean mirror. If the ceiling is too soft or uneven, the system has to work harder. It might boost the high frequencies to make sure the sparkle of the sound survives the bounce.
So, if Daniel sets up these tension poles with some high-end wireless speakers, and he uses the ceiling for the high channels, he's basically got a professional theater in a room where he can't even put up a shelf.
Pretty much. And the beauty of the 2026 tech is that it's all calibrated via an app. He doesn't need to be an acoustic engineer, he just needs to be able to follow the ghost-catching instructions on his phone for 5 minutes.
You mentioned the Soundcore speaker he has now. For someone who isn't ready to drop $2,000 on a high-end multi-speaker system, are there ways to proify a single speaker setup like his?
Definitely. First, placement. He mentioned having it at a 45-degree angle. If he can, he should try to place it so it has a clear line of sight to at least 2 walls. Spatial algorithms in single speakers rely heavily on side wall reflections to create width. If he tucks it behind a pile of books or right up against a curtain, he's killing the spatial effect.
So, give it some breathing room.
Give it room to breathe. Also, many of these speakers have a wall mode or corner mode in their apps. People often ignore those, but they change the equalization radically. In a corner, bass frequencies get naturally amplified. It's called the boundary effect. If the speaker doesn't know it's in a corner, it'll sound boomy and distorted. Turning on corner mode tells the digital signal processor to pull back on those low frequencies, which actually makes the bass sound tighter and more professional.
That's a great tip. It's counterintuitive. You'd think more bass is better, but it's really about correct bass. I'm also curious about the source material. If Daniel is watching Netflix on his projector, does the spatial magic work even if the movie wasn't recorded in Atmos?
That's a big part of the computational side. Most modern systems have what's called an upmixer. It uses a neural network to analyze a standard stereo track in real time. It identifies which sounds are ambient, like rain or crowd noise, and which are direct, like dialogue. It then pulls the ambient sounds out and pushes them to the spatial height or rear channels. It's not as good as a native Atmos track, but it's shockingly effective.
It's like those AI tools that can take an old black and white photo and add color. It's making an educated guess about where the sound should be.
Exactly. And because we're in 2026, these upmixers are incredibly sophisticated. They can recognize the acoustic signature of a voice and make sure it stays locked to the screen, even if the other sounds are swirling around the room.
So, Daniel's projector setup could actually benefit from this, even if he's watching an old 80s movie that was originally in mono or stereo.
Totally. It breathes new life into old content. But there is one pro tip I have to give him for a small room. Don't forget the subwoofer crawl.
The subwoofer crawl. Is that some kind of Jerusalem dance move?
I wish. No, it's a classic audiophile trick for finding the best place for bass. Bass waves are long and they pool in certain parts of a room while disappearing in others. To find the pro spot, you put the subwoofer exactly where you usually sit, right on the bed in Daniel's case. Then, you play something with heavy bass and you literally crawl around the floor on your hands and knees.
This is getting weirder by the minute. Why am I crawling?
You're listening for where the bass sounds the cleanest and most balanced. When you find that spot on the floor, that is where you should put the subwoofer. Because of the physics of sound reciprocity, if it sounds good there when the source is on the bed, it'll sound good on the bed when the source is there.
That is the most my weird prompts advice I've ever heard. It's scientifically sound, but looks absolutely ridiculous to anyone watching.
It works. And in a small rental room, finding that sweet spot for the bass can make a $100 subwoofer sound like a $500 one. It prevents that room rumble that usually annoys the neighbors.
Which is the other rental constraint. You don't want to get evicted because your spatial audio helicopter sounded too real to the guy living downstairs.
Exactly. That's why the Pro systems also have night modes, or apartment modes. They use dynamic range compression to make sure the dialogue is clear even at low volumes, and they use psychoacoustic bass enhancement.
Wait, psychoacoustic bass? How does that work?
It's a trick of the brain. The speaker plays harmonics of a low frequency that it can't actually produce. Your brain hears those harmonics and fills in the missing deep note. You get the feeling of deep bass without the physical vibrations that shake the floor and wake up the neighbors.
That is genuinely mind-blowing. It's like the phantom limb of audio. Your brain is doing the heavy lifting that the hardware can't.
Precisely. So for Daniel, the pro path is use tension poles for height, find the bass sweet spot with the crawl, use apartment mode to stay friends with the neighbors, and let the computational EQ handle the fact that his room is a weird shape.
It's amazing how much a professional audio has moved from having the perfect room to having the smartest software. It's very democratic in a way. You don't need a custom-built home theater wing anymore.
You really don't. You just need a bit of curiosity and maybe a willingness to crawl around your bedroom floor for 10 minutes.
I think we've given Daniel a lot to think about. From the sonar chirps to the acoustic mirrors and the phantom images. It's a brave new world of sound.
It really is. And honestly, it makes me want to go recalibrate my own setup. I think I moved a bookshelf last week and I haven't updated my room map. I'm probably living in an acoustic nightmare and I don't even know it.
We can't have that, Herman. We have standards to uphold.
Guilty as charged. But before I go find my ghost-catching phone, we should probably wrap this up.
Definitely. This has been a fascinating dive. It's one of those things where the more you look into it, the more you realize how much math is happening every time you hear a leaf crunch in a movie.
It's beautiful, really. It's the intersection of physics, psychology, and engineering, all just to make us feel like we're actually in the middle of a forest instead of a rental bedroom in Jerusalem.
Well said. And hey, if you're listening and you've managed to rig up a pro sound system in a tiny space, or if you've got your own weird prompt about the tech in your house, we'd love to hear about it. You can find the contact form at myweirdprompts.com.
And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the how and why of the world around us, a quick review on your podcast app or a rating on Spotify really helps the show. It helps other curious people find us in the vast ocean of the internet.
It really does. Thanks to our housemate Daniel for sending this one in. Hopefully, his room mapping goes smoother than the mold situation.
We can only hope. This has been My Weird Prompts. I'm Herman Poppleberry.
And I'm Corn. You can find us on Spotify and at our website, myweirdprompts.com.
Thanks for listening and stay curious.
See you next time.
Actually, Corn, one last thing. Do you think the subwoofer crawl works for sloths, or do you just kind of slowly slide?
I think for me, it's more of a subwoofer nap. I just stay in one spot and wait for the bass to find me.
Fair enough. Until next time, everyone.
Bye.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox Turbo.
Thanks for listening to another episode of My Weird Prompts, an AI-generated podcast featuring Daniel Rosehill's AI prompts, as answered by a revolving cast of friendly AI characters including me, Cornelius the Sloth. Subscribe on Spotify or visit myweirdprompts.com.